Today we're going to be talking about how to analyze a rental property. People overcomplicate this a ton online, or they oversimplify it if you're a guru. So they'll omit a bunch of expenses to make their deals look better. And I just wanted to give a really quick, down and dirty overview to help you understand it's really not that complex. So watch. First things first, you've got rent. Now, in most of your properties, that will be your only income source. There are occasions where you're going to have like somebody paying a part of utilities. There's a couple different ways that can work. We call it like rubs, where people, like if it's 4 people in a house, you split it 4 ways. There's different ways, but generally speaking, you want your properties to have their own meters. And so you would want this to just be paid directly by the tenants, not coming to you and then you have to pay the utility bill, because that's just another headache you have to deal with. So realistically, rent on most of your properties is going to be the only income source. Now, again, when you get into larger properties, you might have additional sources of income from those, laundry service, whatever, but we're keeping this to like a single family house. So there you go, income, not that complicated. I will say that if you don't currently have tenants when you're buying the place, this number, you don't want to just make it up. You want to go somewhere like Rentometer or ask 2 or 3 property managers in the area what they think your place would draw for market rent. You're going to get a really good idea of what this market rent per month should be before you're underwriting a property. And that's even if there is a tenant, you might want to underwrite it at current and then also at market, because a lot of these mom and pop landlords over time, if they have a tenant there for a long time, they don't continue to upkeep rents, and so over time they'll fall behind. You might have a property like a tenant paying $700 when it should be $1,200, and so you want to make sure you know current numbers, but also they call it pro forma, but what you should be able to expect down the road. Now, as far as expenses, right, this is where you'll see the gurus. They'll say something like they'll say mortgage, and then they'll say actually, sometimes that's all they say. They'll say, taxes, right? And then they'll kind of like leave it there. But like, let's do this, right? So if you're buying, let's say you're using a VA loan, mortgage is going to be what we call PITI, right? And that is your principal, interest, don't mind my crap handwriting, taxes, and your insurance, because that'll be bundled on like a VA loan. But you want to make sure you have all these numbers for every property you buy, whether it's VA loan, it's all bundled into the mortgage, or if you have to do the taxes and insurance separately. You're going to want to look at the last year's taxes. You don't want to get quotes from an insurance company. You want to know what all that is, right? And then you're going to look at, say PM, which is your property manager. And I would say, even if you plan on self-managing, you should buffer this, because you never know if down the road you may end up hiring a property manager. Just good to know what that looks like in your area. You can usually assume 10 to 12%. Now, I pay 7, right? So like, this is market, right? But talk to property managers. You can get 8%, you can get 6%, you can get 7%, you can get 10%, right? It just depends on the property manager, how many, like, you're gonna get discounts as you scale. There's a lot of different things there, but figure out what the number is, buffer it, and this percentage is of your rent, right? So if you get, let's call it 1,000, and you're paying 10%, that would be $100 a month in rent, right? And then we've got vacancy, we've got maintenance, we've got CapEx. I'll explain all these in a second. And then, you might have like turnover, but I usually buffer that into the vacancy. And so this is what these are, right? Vacancy, every time a tenant moves out, you're gonna have a 1 to 3 week, ideally, no more than that, period of time between tenants, right? I usually just pick 7%, for that. Honestly, like for me, I literally just buffer 7, 7, 7, and this is actually 7 for me too. So I buffer 7s all the way down. I'll tell you this, that's generally conservative. My vacancy is usually at 4 to 5%. My maintenance costs usually right around that 7% mark. Capital expenditures are probably closer to 5%. And then my turnover cost is wrapped into vacancy, so I don't actually pay that as an additional unless something goes really south. So I budget for it nonetheless, but this is the scope, guys. It's really not that complicated. You take your income, you subtract all the possible expenses, right? Now, if you're in a property where you're paying utilities for the tenant, then you put utilities down here and then they reimburse you, right? And there are other situations where you may have to pay, you're probably gonna have utilities on the property anyway. If it's like a fourplex and you're paying or if it's an apartment and you're paying like the common areas like lighting, because that's not a tenant's responsibility. You're probably gonna have, depending on how you set up your lease, you're probably gonna have trash. Boy, it is weird to write like that. Probably gonna have a trash expense, which is like $30 a month. Well, probably $15 a month. But this is really it. Like, you just need to go and plug in all these numbers into your local market. Figure out what local, what maintenance averages are for your property managers, capital expenditures. There's a lot of different calculations for all this. But if you have answers to what your rent is and what all this is, then you can literally just say, that's 1,000, and let's say this is 450 all in. I'm just making numbers up, and that's 100, and then this is 70, 70, 70, and let's say 15. I'm going to do math in public. 210, 310, 325, so 775, which means that you would have $225 a month left over on this property. I would buy that, especially if you got into this for like 0 down. But point being, look, this is like, don't overcomplicate this stuff. This is as simple as analysis needs to be for rental property. You have all the income, take out all the expenses, bottom end, you take that money and you say, am I okay making that much per month based on how much I put in? So if you let's say you put in $10,000 down on this property and it cash flows $200 a month, so $2,400 a month, that's a 24% return on your cash. That's pretty good, right? There's a lot of different ways to factor this. There's a couple different like rules of thumb that people use. So one, your mortgage, like your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, shouldn't be more than 50% of your total perceived income. If this was 550, the odds are it's really not a deal worth buying. That's kind of a rule of thumb. Another rule of thumb is that the rent, $1,000 a month, if you're buying a $100,000 property, rent should be at least 1% of that a month. So $1,000 a month, right? If it's not that, so if this was 800, probably wouldn't cash flow. And by the way, like if this buffer, $25 a month, that's cash flow, but too many things could go wrong. I wouldn't play that game if that's thin of a margin. There's a couple other rules of thumb, but these are the two biggest ones. Mortgage should be less than 50% of your expenses. Property should rent for at least 1% a month of your purchase price. You should know all these numbers. And then really from there, it's just basic math. It is addition, subtraction. People overcomplicate this online because they want their audience to feel like they need to pay for this information, but this is it. Now I see gurus all the time saying like, oh, my properties cash flow like this because apparently they are the only tenants ever that never vacate, don't have any maintenance, the house never ages, nothing. And for the record, if you don't know, CapEx, capital expenditures, is like replacing the roof, replacing a washer dryer. It is those items that will have to go out inevitably because they will get old. A water heater, HVAC, things like that. So you just budget for it so that when it happens, you're not like, oh shoot, I have a $15,000 expense like you've been saving for 20 years, so it's okay. The number of gurus I see online who apparently don't pay taxes, don't pay insurance, don't have any vacancy or anything else, and they're like, deals are doing amazing. And then they try to sell you their course to teach you this because it's so complicated you can't figure it out on its own. It's pretty sad. Like really, income minus expenses equals number. If you're okay with number, given the amount you're putting down on the property, there you go. Don't overcomplicate it. If you got questions, drop them in the comment. We'll do more videos to get more deep dive into this.